Good morning all, and a very warm welcome to our live webinar this morning. We'll give it a few minutes just for everyone to file in, and then we'll kick it off. It's a understatement to say it's a massive week. It's a big day in the sector, isn't it? Panelists were just talking before about the headlines, some of the headlines coming through this morning already, and then of course Bill Shorten's press club address in about an hour. So we'll make sure we finish in good time to have you all free to join that. Welcome Alan, Anne-Marie, Ben, Cameron, Graham, Grant, James, Jamila, Jonathan, Katie, Matthew, Nick, Peter, Ryan, Sally, Yuan, Xander. Everyone's flowing in. So we'll give it about another minute. The panelists are joining us from different locations. Where are you today, Drew? Are you in Tassie or are you?
Yes, yeah, I'm here in Tassie in Hobart today.
Fantastic, beautiful Tassie. And Phil, you're on the peninsula, is that right?
I am on the peninsula at Sage's Cottage Farm inside an 1850s heritage protected cottage. There you go.
Beautiful. We had a bit of a mini tour before, didn't we? It looks like a beautiful spot. And Wendy, where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from Ability Work, so another disability organisation here in Melbourne in Kew.
Fantastic, wonderful. All right, so in essence of time, we'll have everyone finished off well before 12:30. So let's kick it off. So again, very warm welcome to all. Thank you for making the time on a very busy week and a busy day, and of course this time of year. Just a brief bit of context from myself. Foundstone Advisory, we're a dedicated strategy advisory. We work across healthcare, not-for-profit and social enterprise. And we've been working across broader not-for-profit and NDIS providers for a while now, working at a CEO and a board level on organisation-wide strategy. And as a key part of that, more recently, the topic of M&A and partnerships is becoming a lot more prevalent. We've done a number of market scans ourselves as an advisory with providers, but then independently ourselves. And there's some really fascinating insights. And what we've been hearing from multiple providers is that they want to hear from other organisations, leaders, like the panel here today, about what are some of their learnings and insights from M&A and partnership over the last couple of years to share. So that's really the essence of the background behind today's conversation. Just a brief bit of context and housekeeping. We're going to keep the agenda fairly straightforward. I'll introduce the panel very shortly. I'll then do a brief scene set in terms of a bit more of the context behind the market scans and the work we're seeing. And then we'll get straight into the panel discussion. Less slides today and more conversation. After I've finished, we'll unshare and it'll be all a free-flowing conversation, more of a kind of a podcast style. We'd really like to hear from the attendees on the call today in terms of there's the chat function there, which I'm sure you're all pretty used to. And then we'd love to hear any questions, log them in the Q&A function, and really happy to look at them as we go along. So don't keep your questions necessarily to the end. Feel free to plug them into the Q&A feature, and I'll then look at potentially asking them to some of the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel today. And just briefly, the panel today, although the main focus is around M&A, partnerships is certainly a key part of that. As you'll be hearing, we think partnerships is a good thread to start to test the water into perhaps more formal M&A. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation myself as well on these themes. So we might start with yourself, Drew, if that's okay. Very, very welcome to the panel. A bit of background on Drew. Drew is the CEO of Possibility Lifestyle Solutions, which is the organisation resulting from a significant merger in late 2022. Drew was previously the COO of Possibility and then became the CEO in 2016. The combined Possibility Lifestyle Solutions organisations is now some 4,000 employees operating across Australia. Drew's also led several previous M&A and broader partnerships across disability, employment, social enterprise, and large government contracts. And being a qualified social worker, he's got first-hand experience in the sector and brings a wealth of practical knowledge and new thinking in the M&A space. So very welcome, Drew. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Wendy, welcome, Wendy. Wendy was recently the CEO of Latrobe Valley Enterprises, a prominent disability services organisation and social enterprise who operate across Victoria and prominently in Gippsland. Wendy led and developed significant partnerships with various multinational companies, enabling critical disability employment outcomes and financially sustainable services across some major infrastructure projects, which we'll be hopefully hearing a bit of in the panel. Wendy's now the founder and MD of a social impact advisory who work across healthcare, government, NDIS, and broader. So welcome, Wendy.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
And last but certainly not least, we've got Phil Hayes-Brown. Phil is the CEO of Wallara Australia. He's been the CEO since 2010 after a career spanning investment banking, commercial law, and sports marketing. He's led the growth of Wallara now across 30 locations and servicing 500 plus clients. He's led the launch of various social enterprise initiatives, including Sage's Cottages, farm down in Mornington Peninsula, which I believe that's where he is today, and built successful partnerships with the likes of St Kilda Footy Club and Monash Uni. Wallara acquired Brunswick Industries this year, resulting in the expansion of the organisation's geography and broader impact, and looking forward to hear a bit more about that today. So welcome, Phil.
Thanks, great to be with you.
So just a very brief scene set from myself, a bit of why behind the topic. So as I mentioned, that we're a strategy advisory working across a number of different providers in the disability space, of course, but a bit broader than that, across healthcare, across organisation-wide strategy, but of course M&A. And in the context of M&A, the 40 or so providers that we've been across in a combination of market scans and strategy, around 60% of those providers are seriously considering M&A. So as I mentioned, providers are wanting to learn more about what has happened in the industry, how they can do things better and approach this space. We're well aware of this significant industry change. I mean, today is with the big announcements coming through, we've had the Royal Commission, etc. From what I see, that is certainly a part of what is driving the conversation. Organisations really want to learn how their own organisation is really positioned. Organisations are considering where they really fit. Will they be potentially acquiring? Will they be merging, perhaps with a like-size organisation? Could they be divesting in some service lines, or could they potentially be acquired? And then what kind of resources do they really need to progress these conversations? And then lastly, in terms of organisations wanting to explore early conversations, we're seeing there's certain ways to progress M&A conversations initially without perhaps having to invest significant dollars and resources up front. We're seeing providers are really keen, in a confidential sense, of course, to have early conversations with potentially other providers that could be complementary services and geographies. So I think the sector is really unique in that sense, and I think that'll be really interesting going forward. Some of just the brief questions that we asked some of our customers, and I thought it'd just be helpful to share before we get stuck into the panel. The first one is really, where does M&A fit into the broader organisation strategy? And this might sound a bit basic, but we see that getting back to the grassroots fundamentals of why we're looking at M&A in the context of the broader organisation strategy. Where does it fit against organic growth? How does it look from an efficiency, attracting the right kind of staff, etc.? So we like to start from that perspective. In terms of criteria, we very much encourage organisations to look at this from the outside looking in. So, taking less assumptions because things are moving quite quickly. make less assumptions, and go and start to have some conversations to build your own criteria. We see it's really valuable. Those insights, we're seeing the data from a provider perspective is really fragmented. Although there's some really good data out there, it's really in pockets. So we see, building your own nuanced insights to inform your own strategy decisions in this space is really powerful. And then last, in terms of the considerations, which we'll shortly be hearing a bit from the panel, start to look at the horizon in terms of what this means from a client experience, what does it mean from a culture and a scale, the positives and then also the challenges. So hopefully that is reasonably valuable to set a bit of the scene and some questions that we see. So enough from me and enough from the slides. Let's get into the panel. And Drew, I might start with yourself if that's all right. It'd be great just to hear just a bit about yourself, the context of the organisation, and also a bit of your career background in the context of M&A and partnerships. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. So in terms of experience, I guess, in partnerships and mergers and acquisitions, which in the not-for-profit sector kind of is a different slant on things, because there's not necessarily any value being traded and settled for a financial amount in any case. So it's really trying to deeply partner with organisations to support a shared pursuit of mission and objectives of the organisation. So I think you touched before on the merger that we've undertaken with Lifestyle Solutions last year, probably being the most significant in scale for us, but certainly probably has the same types of elements and same types of considerations as many of the other things that we've done when thinking about much smaller partnerships and acquisitions. I think for our organisation anyway, what has been very important to us is to partner with organisations who share our vision for the world and share our understanding of the world, and importantly for us, that's around human rights and not being affiliated with faith-based organisations or other types of welfare type organisations. Really important to the DNA of the organisation, and so we've looked for opportunities to work with others that are consistent with those sorts of objectives. We did a merger with Oak Tasmania some years ago, back in 2015. A very proud employment organisation here in Tasmania, and whilst that was really important, because employment and support with employment's been really important to the people we support and their families forever since we've been surveying them. It did come with its own challenges, and many people will be aware of the pretty vague policy settings as it relates to supported employment in the NDIS specifically, as the rollout's gone over the last 10 years. But also the history of the organisation that actually come from a more welfare-based charitable type of organisation, and so we're able to understand some of those sort of core ways that you see the world and how they can sometimes conflict and create areas where you need to work hard to actually build joint alignment. So I think one of the really important things is about being clear about what is in the DNA of your organisation. What are the things that you die in a ditch it on? Because it's good to be clear about those and good to be able to elicit those from other organisations that you might seek to partner with, simply because those things can often slow you down in many different ways, but that often is the core issue. So I guess that's probably the first reflection. I think we are working in an environment in a sector where there is a lot of change. There's been a lot of change for some time now, and some of that is practice change, and that's good change. It's about learning better ways of supporting people, whether it's with employment or independent living, whatever the arrangement. And some of it is bureaucratic funding changes and other changes that we have to participate in. So, for example, the various Fair Work changes that have come through over recent times, some of the other obligations that externally get placed upon organisations that we need to respond to. But it's clear in the NDIS that change is going to be an ever-present phenomena for us for some time. Today is a really important day in terms of the recommendations that will come out of the review and government's sort of high-level response to those. But I do think it speaks to an environment where we'll all need to be more efficient and effective at working with each other to make sure that we can see the scheme succeed. The ideas that many of us, I think, were sort of foisted upon us early on in the transition about needing to compete and act like businesses and all the rest of it, there is that much work to do, that actually cooperating together and sharing and partnering where one organisation has strength over another is actually a really worthwhile way of getting the outcomes that we're all committed to.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's a brilliant point, and I like the fact that you've highlighted the DNA and organisations sharing your vision. And just briefly, from your own professional kind of career and journey, you've seen the organisation grow from originally in Tassie, I think, quite a small organisation over the years. So just very briefly, what's that been like from a professional career perspective? Pretty rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like having a different job every year, I think, which is probably true of everybody. The change in scale is obviously something that necessitates different ways of working, and the types of systems and processes that you need to have in place to assure yourself of the various things you need to be across. Access to workforce, I think, once you're much larger, becomes a more predominant issue. Because some of the sort of natural strengths you have when you're sort of a big fish in a small pond in terms of people knowing who you are, understanding that there is good work to be done in the organisation, that dilutes as you move out of your own area and into other areas, and takes some time to build. But it's also compounded by the broader economic and labour challenges the whole economy is experiencing. So I think that change to scale is really an interesting one. I think the change in the professionalisation and capability sets that we need in the organisation to actually drive the organisation have changed, and they're always interesting transitions. Some people in your existing team, when you step up, the size of the organisation can really readily make that change, and for others, they probably can but don't want to, or for others it's probably just a step too far. And so just managing that in a way that's really consistent with the organisational values, but also making sure you don't get bogged down and stuck in that because you need to be doing what's in the best interest of the organisation. It's a tricky balance, and it's certainly something that I've experienced and others in the team have experienced. And everyone comes to here to make a great contribution, and we all are custodians of the organisation for a period of time. And so I think if you can instill that kind of mentality with people, then everyone makes their contribution and everyone decides to go or stay depending on where they think they are, and that's probably the most respectful way of doing that. But certainly that is a rub, and one that comes with a bit of heartache as well at times. But ultimately, always thinking about the future, thinking about what's in the best interest of the organisation in terms of improving its practice and doing better for the people we support is the most important thing.
Brilliant. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Phil, might come to you in terms of just a bit of background on the organisation. You've been with the organisation and led and been part of the growth for a number of years, and an interesting career background even before that. Can you tell us a bit about, a quick bit of scene set at the organisation and yourself?
Sure. It's great to be here and a very big day. Well, I arrived and I never thought I'd work in the disability sector. My background is commercial world, really. NBA, I was a lawyer, then I worked in sports. I loved sports. The NBA was all about partnerships with Nike or Reebok or Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Americans use the word partner a lot, but if you don't pay them their royalties, it's interesting how the word partner gets actually applied.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was very sharp end of commercial practice and branding, and then and I've got two kids. To give you my lens, I got a boy who's 23 who was a professional basketballer, so that was fun working in the NBA and having a kid who loved hoops. But my daughter, Phoebe, is now 21, and Phoebe is nonverbal and has a disability, a moderate intellectual disability, and uses Auslan to communicate. and she's why I work in this job now. So I've done 13 years inside disability, which coincidentally is about the same time I did with the NBA and then Hawthorn Footy Club with elite athletes. So my outlook is very much driven by that. And I think I've got the best job that I've had so far. I think of our clients as the playing group, and I think of our frontline crew as coaches, all trying to help our athletes achieve the best outcomes they can. So that's helped me transfer across, and I'm really interested in growth and expansion and things like that. And my sort of insight, I think, to share today is that, as Drew said, you know, my key learning in this sector, we talk and genuinely about the people we support and person first and all that great stuff. But I think when one of the reasons why there isn't more M&A activity is that we all have egos, you know, and self-interest, and CEOs love being CEOs and boards love protecting the legacy of those organizations. We've all got great stories of volunteers from the 50s, and the idea of handing that over to someone else, unless you're in distress, sometimes can feel a bit wrong. So as Drew said, we are custodians. We don't own these organizations. And I hope that the pressures that apply, there's certainly more collaboration, more partnerships, more M&A activity, and I hope that continues, because I think underneath it, we're all got self-interest, and it's important to try to park that as much as you can.
I think I'm really glad you raised that point, because it's not often talked about in the context, isn't it? So that's we'll get a bit more to that as we go along. So thank you. And Wendy, so from a partnerships perspective, you know, you were the CEO of LVE for a number of years, and now you're out consulting. So looking at M&A and then partnerships, be good to hear about, you know, how you're seeing the world at the moment in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Andrew. I really think one of the, I mean, I've been in the disability sector and that broader social enterprise sector for around 8 years now. So, and really learning through firsthand experience the power of partnerships as a way to really quickly expand capacity for an organisation, but also to drive increased capabilities for employees with disabilities, how they can learn new tasks and learn to work with different organisations. And it's really a way for organisations themselves to solve problems for industry and to take on larger projects for their products and services. So I've been fortunate enough, even through now Tuscany, working with organisations trying to build those partnerships where they're, you know, that they haven't decided to go and do M&A, but they're happy to partner with other organisations. So you know, creating those successful partnerships through LVE has obviously enabled me to see that that's actually a really great way to create success. And I really think of partnerships as a collaborative advantage. So rather than a competitive advantage, it's collaborative advantage. And it's really what you can gain by collaborating with other organisations rather than going it alone. You know, some of the partnerships that we set up at LVE, Marriott's, and I noticed that Anne-Marie is on the call today, and she's CEO currently at Marriott's. And we partnered with Marriott's to pitch for a DHHS statewide grounds maintenance program. So it meant that, you know, that was a project we could take on as both organisations together, both, you know, aligned skill sets, aligned cultures, and it meant that we could take on something that we just couldn't have done by ourselves. So it was a really great partnership to work together with them. We've done other partnerships with YMCA Rebuild, which is another social enterprise employing people from ex-prison system, and we were asked by university contracts to do a supply and install of signage, and however we couldn't do the install, being a 4-hour return trip plus about a week long of accommodation requirements. So we actually partnered with YMCA Rebuild, and it enabled us to deliver on the contract, create, you know, success for both LVE and YMCA Rebuild. And I think it's just those opportunities where you can see that it's not, you're not standing on anyone's toes, there's no competition, but it's creating really great outcomes. Another one that we did was outside of LVE was creating a partnership for Coffee Vibes, which is a social enterprise cafe now operating in Warragul in Gippsland. And Baw Shire Council came to me asking about a connection for a social enterprise. And so I connected Knoxbrook, who were in Warragul but didn't currently do any hospitality services. But I reached out to Street, and to Street actually do training in hospitality. So it meant that, again, there was no sort of competitive stepping on toes, but it really did create an environment where Knoxbrook could enter a new stream of work, create opportunities for their employees with disabilities and learn new skills, so capacity and capability. And Street got to work with them and personalise and tailor the systems for them. So I think, partnerships are a really great way to, start to test the water and look at, how you might work with other organisations, but really you have to know your organisation really well too. So, what your own culture is and who might you partner with, that you can work collaborative.
For sure. And I know that in terms of, although operating the NFP space, there's still a definite focus on, commercial and financial viability as part of, these partnerships, which has to make it work. So thank you. Drew, I might come back to you. And there's a question here from James, speaking to the concept of, the 1 + 1 equaling 3. And just in the context of your learnings and takeaways, James also is asking about, in terms of staffing, he mentioned, international, is there merit in looking at broader, he mentions international teams. Perhaps around that, can you take us, with the merger that you've been through right from the start and now kind of going through and still going through, can you take us through some of the learnings, perhaps from a staffing perspective? You talked about, the change of scale and professionalism. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things I'd say on the staffing, because mergers do create a lot of uncertainty for people, and I think, when you think about mainly where that uncertainty sits, it's the people who think they might have duplicate roles. So it's very rarely people who are delivering direct support, so our support professionals, because I think for most of us, we'd all like more support professionals, good ones at any given time. So I think for those people and the service supervisors and people involved in the operations of the organisation, the messaging can be quite simple because realistically they will continue to be needed, and there'll probably be additional benefits, and probably being clear about what those benefits might be. So some practical ones, and these are fine to share, is there might be differences in how you apply your salary packaging, so it might be available to casuals on one side and not available to casuals on the other, and so you can take a uniform approach that might improve access to that particular benefit for casual staff. For example, certainly access to training in the most recent merger that we've completed, certainly access to clinical services in terms of having access to nursing and behavioural support specialisms and those sorts of things, which are really important, sometimes hard to get in regional locations across Australia. So some of that was really useful, and I think being able to be clear and also indicate timeframes of when those things might be able to come out is really important. At a high level, communication obviously is the most important thing. So communicating regularly, communicating clearly, making sure that your key leadership team and the leadership teams in other parts of the organisation understand their role in leading change as well. Certainly that's a learning we've taken from the last one, in terms of making sure that people understood that they have a role in leading change and making people feel safe and secure in that process. When it comes to integration, so once practical completion's achieved, you've probably done a fair bit of integration planning leading up to then it's about making sure that those integration plans are really well formed out. They've had the right amount of consultation, but they're also well governed as well. And certainly for us, we've at every time established a merger implementation committee which oversights the work of that integration team. I think it's important to make sure that you resource those teams effectively and people aren't doing that work off the side of their desks. So if you are asking people with particular skill sets to come onto those teams, then to make sure that they're appropriately backfilled and those backfill arrangements are well supported so that the people who are backfilling can make the most of that acting up opportunity if that's what comes for them. For us to get that 1.1 plus 1 equals 3 or 5 or whatever it is, I think there's the way that we've approached it is really to think about what we sort of call tactical integration, which is how do you get everybody onto similar systems and similar ways of being paid and standardise your policies and procedure sets and those sorts of things. And then there's the value creation integration, which happens after that. And you're obviously doing planning for that as you go through the process, but you're certainly thinking about, well, how do we realise the benefits that we thought about going into this partnership to make sure that they're realised for the people that we support and the staff that are providing that support. And that can be really substantial change in terms of, significant system replacement and changing. It could, for us, it's been around standardising practice frameworks, which inform parts of the work across the organisation, establishing a human rights framework which guides the organisation's work to get some consistency and approach, and then to really think about some of those big ticket items like what's a longer term workforce plan for the organisation, what's our sustainability plan look like, and then also thinking the whole way through how will we know if we've got there, because it's easy to lose momentum once you've got the big ticket items done, and that's again why I would say that governance piece in terms of making sure that there is a structure that's guiding the work and making sure that the integration work actually continues, because if you don't, you end up with a lot of things that are half done, and that's where you, I think, risk getting the real value to the participants that we support.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm just going to switch while I'm with you, Drew, and then I'll go to Phil on the similar question. There's a question here from Mary Jane. In terms of if we kind of pause and go back to very early stages of when you were forming the strategy, and I know you can only share probably parts of this, but you as a leader in the organisation, Mary Jane's asking, how long was the kind of the runway did it take to find a suitable partner in those terms? And can you talk us a bit about, the strategy kind of mindset and the thinking at that very early stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So growth's been on our organisation's mind since the beginning of the NDIS. We were in Tasmania a large provider, but realistically a small provider into a scheme that was more than going to double. And it was a national scheme, so we had different stakeholders in terms of those being federal stakeholders rather than state-based stakeholders. So our strategy was really to get to a sustainable size so that we could maintain our independence. That was really the core of the strategy, if you think about it. And as we went through the introduction of the scheme, Tasmania was in the trial site, so and it was age-based, so we had some early learning that probably other providers didn't have the opportunity to learn from, because they were in the Barwon region, they were in the Hunter region, and they were in Tassie, and then there were other trials that went on after that. So I think we got some IP, which was advantageous to us in terms of being able to partner with other organisations. So our strategy for growth really was to do more and to see if we could partner with others who wanted to do more with us. And you can't do that if you don't tell anyone that. So part of that is making sure that you're clear with your stakeholders and with partner organisations and colleagues about the intentions of your organisation. Because what do they say in real estate? You can't sell a secret, and it's kind of the same thing with your strategy. If people don't understand what you're trying to achieve and you're not very clear about it, then it's hard for people who might want to help you or might want to be part of that to actually know how they can be involved. So I think it's really important to be really clear. And how do you find partners? Well, you can't find partners if you sit behind your desk all day and you don't talk to anybody and you don't cooperate and collaborate with people in terms of what you do. And that's certainly a feature of the organisation that I work in, is that that's always been the case. And so we've always been doing projects with other providers and other groups, engage with advocacy groups, partnering with government and compensable insurance schemes, those sorts of things. And through those relationships, you work out who's a bit like you. and who has that kind of that DNA piece that I was talking about. And the other thing is, you said that 60% of people are thinking about M&A. It's one thing to think of it, I think would be my take from it. It's another thing to do something about it, and to take a leap of faith, because it is a big decision. And for directors who've got a series of obligations to think about, they weigh those things very heavily. But I think my other sort of takeaway would be that if you're really clear that that's what you want to do, then you need to get into the mindset of what that might be like, because exploring the idea and kicking the tires, so to speak, it isn't purposeful enough actually to get you to a point where you might want to make a decision. And then when you make a decision, you've got to make sure that the analysis is thorough, that you understand the risks, you understand the benefits, and that you can readily assess the capability as well as the suitability of the plans that you put in place to achieve it, and then make a decision. But I think that many times I've seen in the sector, people take far too long on these things, aren't deliberate enough at the beginning of the process, and haven't got a clearly marked out time frame, because the time that you spend engaging in these discussions, doing due diligence, going through all of it, is highly distracting. And you want to make sure that that's a good investment in your time, because it's an opportunity cost for doing other things in terms of improving the way that you provide services to the people you serve.
Great. I really like in terms of how you frame that, being really clear on your intentions, which kind of frames those other points. So thank you. Phil, I might move to you. And in the context of, you've recently acquired and merged with Brunswick Industries. Can you tell us a bit, and even in light of the question about the runway and the time and the strategy thinking, be great to hear.
I think that's interesting, because I've been in 2 M&A serious ones, a few dances, but really 2. And the first one died on the vine because it just went too long. Yeah, it went way too long. And just when you thought the thing was done, they wanted another workshop to work out how it was going to work, and is everyone on the same page? And the light in the eyes of my team just had gone out, So you certainly need not to rush these things, but I'd say too long is just as dangerous as not long enough. But with Brunswick, they approached us, and it was they were looking for someone that they felt comfortable with, as Drew said, people like us a bit. I mean, they are supported employment. We have a strong supported employment arm. We're about $30 million a year. I think they were about 3. So we still look big to them, but not terrifyingly big. And they see a chance there that they're more likely to retain their identity and survive, I think, inside with a match like that. And maybe that's wrong, but a smaller fish in the there's some big players out there. Scope $650 million a year, or whatever it is. We're a boutique player. We don't want to be national. We don't want to be. We know what we're strong at. We just want to double down and get better at that. And the attraction for us was that they were in the north of Melbourne. We saw an enterprise that reminded us of us 10 years ago. We could fast track them, if you like, ensure their success, leverage our connections, and then bring over other services once the initial goals were achieved. So it's been a really good fit. But I think the other rare thing is that the board there, walked away. Yeah, they were really interested in placing that organization with a secure home and a better future for all the clients and all the staff, and without really any conditions. They just wanted to find a good fit, and walked away. But as Drew said, there's lots of uncertainty in these things, and a lot of self-interest. So I admire them for that a lot, and we feel the responsibility to make it work. We're about 6 months in. I think the integration phase will be completed by Christmas. We're moving, and so far it's going really well. I'm really pleased with it. The reasons why we thought it made sense have all held up over time, and the prospects for making 1 + 1 = 3 for them and us are already bearing fruit. So systems integration, all those things. So that's my perspective on it, that people go looking for people like us, and they hope to retain some identity and their legacy to be protected rather than digested. Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, retain that identity, and then linking back to your initial point, the ego and self-interest. The example you used, the board had the bigger picture in mind, and I think that's really important. Wendy, just in terms of partnerships, it'd be good just to hear in terms of some of your learnings and takeaways. And there was a question here from Richard around, can partnerships sometimes precede M&A with the same organisation? So that's a big question, isn't it? But it'd be just good to hear, some of your learnings and takeaways from a partnership potentially feeding into the M&A lens.
Yeah, definitely. And great question, Richard. Partnerships, definitely can be undertaken as that potential prequel to an M&A. I think they're a great way to understand how your organisation works in relation to another organisation, what some of those challenges are, how the cultures might align, and the different things that then what to look for as you're trying to go down that more formal M&A path. But I think, thinking as an organisation, as an individual, what opportunities you might have said no to that previously you couldn't do, but if you partnered with somebody that had either the same skills, so you expand, or complementary skills so that you can enter a new industry or something like that. So I think that collaborative advantage that I spoke about can really create that greater value that goes beyond what each individual organisation can achieve on its own. So combining the resources and the expertise and the capabilities to really develop innovative solutions. One such partnership that LVE and Phil's organisation, Wallara, were involved with was OC Connections and them creating the recycled bollards. And so it's that collaborative advantage of three organisations coming together. One's doing the recycling of the bollards, one's doing the logistics, one's doing all the labelling. It's ending up, a really great partnership. No one's standing on each other's toes. It's a really great collaborative advantage. The products that really benefits all parties involved in it. And I think looking beyond those sort of short-term goals, of that initial project, why you get together in the first place, is looking beyond that and looking at any future opportunities as well. And, we're all very sensitive to the current environment and the rapidly changing landscape for disability at the moment. And there's a real pressing need for adaptability. So organisations with collaborative advantage are more agile and adaptable, and they really can pivot to respond to those emerging challenges. And I think partnerships are a really great way to leverage those collaborative networks. And I think the mutual benefit as well, each partner in a partnership is really what value are they deriving from that collaboration, whether it's that increased market share, cost savings, or access to those new markets. I think there's so many benefits to partnerships if you're not ready yet for M&A.
For sure. And as you say, it really enables you to test, you can have a lot of talk initially, but it really, when you get into it, then you test the values alignment, the culture in the thick of it, don't you? So it's a really practical way. I'm conscious of time because we want to finish 5 minutes before 12:30. Drew, just in terms of, some of the, you shared, right from the DNA, the scale of change, be really clear on your intentions, opportunity cost. If, you're a fairly, large organisation, there's different attendees on the call with different shapes and size organisations. But if you were to, as kind of a principles approach, any kind of ways where, your peers, other organisations could start to kind of test, to explore this. I know you've mentioned a few of them, but are there a couple that are really front of mind that you could share?
Yeah, look, I think you want to be really clear and understand why it is you want to either partner or to merge or be merged, or to acquire or be acquired. Like, what are the possible scenarios for that? So being really clear why. I think that's really important because it's important for future partners to understand that really clearly. I think being very clear and simple in communication at the early stages and really purposeful is really important. So I would say that. I think if you get to the point where yes, the board is decided, we're going to move into due diligence, then I think the importance of time and diligence in terms of making sure that that process is well managed, is clear about what it's looking for, because I think you can often spend a lot of time finding reasons for things not to occur because you're not clear about what is the threshold at which I would either be worried or not worried about a particular issue. And let's face it, we've all got challenges that we're all dealing with from day to day. So it's easy to go in and and throw rocks at other people because they've got challenges the same or different than each of us as well. So I think being really alive to the fact that none of our organisations are perfect. We all have our own challenges, and being really clear about the why and the strategic benefit and what are the thresholds where you would be concerned enough not to do something is probably really important. And again, just that governance of the process to make sure that it does not drift. I think that because as you go along through these processes, the more and more people know, and the more chances there are for that to get out and to destabilise people and to create all sorts of noise that you don't need and is unnecessary. So being very clear and tight around process and timeframes is really important. And also being clear about what's your decision-making criteria going to be at the end of that process. How is it that you will come to a decision? What's the balance of weight that you're going to provide on each of the criteria that you've set, in addition to whatever your other obligations might be, and then making a decision and moving purposefully. I think this is, my sort of advice, having done, quite a few of these now in different forms, is that being very deliberate and very clear is really important, and that unnecessary drift is just a risk on so many different levels that you just want to avoid that at all costs.
Brilliant. That's very practical, and right from the possible scenarios, and you're really clear that time is important. You've mentioned that a few times, and as Phil. So thank you for that. Phil, I might come to yourself in terms of when we've sort of distill it down to to help other people on the call.
I saw a question from James there about should you have a one-eye focus, like you wouldn't bring in a new system if you're going to do this. And I love the theory of that, but I got 5 balls in the air every day. I don't know, if you wait for the perfect window before you want to go and have a conversation to someone, I think it'll never present. So I get the theory, but in reality, I think you should be talking with people and not finding reasons maybe not to. There's always a system or something coming through, which is a reason to not have the chat. But if you really want to go somewhere, then I'd have the chat. Because maybe you don't need a new system if they've got one, and it could solve the whole problem. But also I have a book recommendation. Someone asked for book recommendations. Killing Fairfax is the book. Killing Fairfax. It's the Rivers of Gold, classified advertising, and the story about how they were so busy protecting their lunch that Seek.com, carsales.com, and realestate.com sprung up and ate their lunch. And they had the domain business, but they were too scared about eating their own lunch. So there you go. If you don't eat your own lunch, someone else will. Killing Fairfax is a great book. And the last thing for me really to sign off today, I think it's great to have conversations. Don't be scared. As Drew said, you can't sell a secret. We're all looking to be more efficient and get better. And there should be conversations and try to park the self-interest. Not easy. We've all got it. We've all got egos, legacy, stories, but that's not really helping the people we support. I think it's good to call that out.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for the book recommendation. That would be, I haven't read that. That would be interesting, that the dynamic Fairfax and Seek. So thank you. And Wendy, from a partnerships perspective, if we're kind of just distilling it down, how would you look at it?
I think back on Drew's point as well is really about the why. Like, why do you want to do that? Is it to increase capacity, enter new markets, adjacent markets? What's your reasoning for doing it? I love to put the people first and think outcome based, what's going to improve the outcome for people with disability within your organisation. But I think you really need to focus on aligned goals. And as Phil said, having just random conversations, keeping in contact with people, you'll identify opportunities before you even realise that you would like to do something. But really having those aligned goals and governance and clear responsibilities, as Drew spoke about as well, really knowing who's doing what within the relationship, who are the key team members, what are the complementary skills, how are you going to manage that down to, the detail of who's submitting the invoices and who's invoicing who. So really understanding that and having that financial transparency around it. great communication, open dialogue solves every problem, I feel. So, and really understanding that you need to be flexible, build some trust, build reliability. And once you do a one partnership, it's a lot easier to do more and more. And I think then it does lend itself to looking at, well, why don't we do this on a permanent basis? So, you know, if it's been successful, it's worked really well, then should we be looking at mergers and acquisitions? And yes, you need to have, as someone's raised in the chat, you need to have your systems really well defined. You need to know who you are, what your culture is, and how you're going to merge with that organisation. But I think partnerships are just, yeah, absolute prequel to M&As.
Great, thank you. I just seeing some comments there. Nick Williamson's calling out, you know, have a very practical purpose and the end point in mind, and then also touching on the what are the systems you need to look at. Ryan mentions the classic Buffett and Munger talk about manager's role. And there's a question in that as well, Ryan, and I'll come back to you on that just in essence of time. Another book recommendations from Mary Jane, so thank you for that, From Impossible to Possible. So there's been a few good practical things shared from the audience, so much appreciated. So just to finish on, where, as has been kind of called out in the panel conversation, you know, providers are quite open to having conversations, those early conversations around potential complementary, you know, the principles and the 1 + 1 equaling X. So it's really refreshing to see that in the sector. If there are any direct questions, or there's some questions we haven't got to, I'll follow up on those. We'll send a summary out, and hope you all enjoy and get some. Hope we all get some insight from the press club address in a few minutes. And thank you for making the time. And lastly, thank you for the panel for sharing all your insights.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Take care.
Cheers. Have a good one. See ya.
Bye.